Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. You're asked to be an executor. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? We'll find out today from our guest, David Edey. David, thanks for being with us today.
Bill, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
David, you're the author of a book called Executor Help. So let's start out with that. What is an executor? We've heard the term a lot, but I bet a lot of us really couldn't define it.
Well, break it down pretty simple is that an executor is an individual that's been given the responsibility to look after someone's estate after they've been deceased. So they're usually named in the will that they're going to take on the responsibility to settle the estate, pay the taxes, make sure that the beneficiaries are taken care of, and then close the estate. That, in a nutshell, is what an executor does, but there's so much to unpack in terms of taking on the responsibility. And, promoting the book, I've been asked the question, and one journalist said to me he went through the situation, and he said it was probably the worst job in the world that you could ever want.
Well, we have the answer to our question: do we want it or not? And you just told us, but you bring out a lot of great points in your book, Executor Help, and that's what we want to go through today and have you tell us now. So, first of all, though, to be an executor, if I'm hearing you correctly, there must be a will.
Correct. Or you would become an executor if the individual died intestate, means without a will, and then the court might appoint an individual, a family friend or someone, and they would name you as an executor to, again, help settle the estate. But you don't, for our sense of conversation, you want to have a will where you've named the executor and you've had the conversations with them to let them know what the responsibility is what's going to entail, and then also prepare them for probably family members and beneficiaries that they may have to deal with. So you want to prepare the executor as much as you can when you're setting up your estate and doing your will.
Now, would someone who's making out their will, would they have simply one executor, John, or would it be John and Frank, or John, Frank, and Joe, or would there be an order to them, 1, 2, 3?
There's no one right answer. Every family and every estate is different. So you might say, for example, it's a family of 3 children, and for some reason you pick 2 or 1 or all 3. Each comes with its own sort of problems, because ideally you'd like the executor to be living close by, in close proximity, because you're going to have to spend a lot of time. On average, you're spending anywhere between probably 100 hours to sell the estate. Can take anywhere between 18 to 24 months on average. And because of the pandemic, it's probably going to take longer. So you'd want someone who can take the time to help settle the estate and do the administration. Also, if you choose a second co-executor, the co-executors have to get along. And that also means that all signatures for checks and anything disbursement from the estate, you're going to need 2 signatures. So they have to get along. And then if, say, for example, in this family, of the 3, you pick 2, then you're going to have a conversation with the 3rd child and explain why you didn't pick them. So there's going to be some strategic thinking as to who you're picking, why you're picking, and then what's going to be the fallout, and have the conversation. I
think you're a troublemaker. You're telling us all these bad things, but obviously this is what we have you on here for today, and you're laughing, but we want to know these things. But I see all the problems that can come up. And if I copied it down correctly from your book, 80% or even maybe more of executors have no prior experience. I mean, they're getting dumped into this person's entire assets for their life, which might, even on a fairly, I guess, normal estate, would be perhaps a house, a condo, a car, some jewelry, maybe 1 or 2 securities, stocks, or a mutual fund, a retirement fund.
Well, even if and that's one of the reasons why, 60% of Americans don't even have a will or an estate plan, because they think that there's no reason to have a will. But you talked about a house and stocks and mutual funds. Soon as you have a bank account and a few assets, may not be a house, but you have a few assets, a car and some other things, you need a will. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't take the time to do the will. And that's where the problems come into play.
And I think you mentioned even, and I'll just ask you to touch briefly on it in your book, even in your own family, and here you are, someone writing the book on it, you had problems with an estate. You had to pay out substantial sums in legal fees. And I'm sure everybody is still kind of unhappy because that's the way things always work out when there's a lawsuit.
Well, in my case, it took 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 settle my parents' estate, and they had a will. And how we ended up having this conversation is that I decided every time I would talk to people about my grief and disappointment having to deal with a sibling that made life difficult for the other two siblings, I'd hear about one more family member that had problems, or an estate, or a family that had broken up. So I didn't want anybody else to have to go through what I went through. So during the pandemic at the beginning, I decided to write this book. And as you say, in my case, what's happened is the three of us haven't spent a holiday together since my parents passed away. And that was in 2000. My father passed away in 2012. My mother passed away in 2011.
And isn't that sad? Because, I mean, it's sad for the event, of course, they're passing, but it is, assuming it wasn't an accident, it'll be a natural event, and it's going to happen to all of us at some point. And
absolutely. Unless
it's a sci-fi movie, that's just the way life goes. But
spoiler alert, we're all going to die.
Yeah. So. But the sad thing, of course, is that the remaining family, which I'm sure no one in your family, your mom or your dad, obviously wanted or certainly didn't want, that there's an argument over it. And probably when we come down, if someone up above in heaven was counting pennies, it would be a few more pennies on one side. Someone else got a set of dishes, and someone else got 3 shares of stock, which may have gone up or gone down. I mean, who knows?
Well, if anything, and then I say this a lot, if anything, my parents didn't have the conversation with everybody. I mean, as an advisor, they actually came in my office and they took care of I had the lawyer take care of them and make sure the will was taken care of. So 2 of the 3 siblings, 2 knew there was always a will. The third one didn't know. And so I assumed, and my other sibling assumed, parents pass away, there's a will, everything should be split 3 ways. What could be fairer than equal? But in the eyes of a one sibling, that wasn't good enough. So that's how we ended up in court for 7 years.
And let me just repeat that. This was a will that gave everybody 1/3, more or less.
Correct.
Of 3 children, you were one of the 3. And a will that did that. It wasn't that you got everything, or your brother or your sister, whoever the family members are, no one person got an excessive amount. No,
it was split 3 ways, but that wasn't good enough for one individual. And that's not uncommon. In researching the book, I interviewed a couple of mediators, and that is a common situation, that just because you have a will doesn't mean it has to be fair. And in the eyes of some individuals, beneficiaries, even though there's a will and it seems fair, they're going to find a reason to want to go to court.
Give us some tips on picking an executor. Let's say it's family, 3 children, A, B, and C. And sometime one moves away and sometime they're local but not that close. Does geographic distance make any difference? Is it the smarter one of the group or the oldest?
Well, you really don't want to say I picked them because they're the smarter one of all of you. But again, it's going to come down to the conversation, and you're going to have to be diplomatic. Ideally, you would hope that the executor that you pick is close by. And if you have co-executors, that they're going to be able to talk to each other so that the estate can get settled quickly. Having said that, you want somebody who's going to be able to stay in contact with the beneficiaries. Someone who's fairly good with money, but will be able to work a professional. And I talk a lot in the book about making sure that you have a team, because you can't do this job alone. I know today a lot of the DIYs, the do-it-yourselfers, want to do everything themselves. But an estate, doesn't matter how big or small it is, it's a good idea to have an accountant, a lawyer, and a financial advisor, just to help you out. Because on average, sometimes you're going to use over 17 different professionals to get the estate settled, depending on the size. So someone who's good at being patient, and also someone who's good at administration. And again, the communication. And I think that's key, communication that you have with the beneficiaries. Because again, beneficiaries don't think twice to wanting to go to court. When the individual wrote the will, they saw that they were leaving a legacy and they were leaving a gift to who they're leaving behind. As a beneficiary, they see that as money coming to them. It's an inheritance. And you see a lot of people change when there's an inheritance coming, and you'll see the worst of people. And that's what I also write about in the book, what we call the curse of inheritance, sense of entitlement.
David, before we go further, I'd like our audience to know that if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is David Edey, E-D-E-Y. His book is Executor Help. And David, can you tell us where we can get this book and if there's a website where we can get more information?
The book is available at all great online retailers like Amazon, or you can go to my website, davidedey.com, davidedey.com. And I've got free resources on there. I've got 50 questions to every executor might ask. You can download those questions. I've got checklists on there. And the book is done very well. I'm getting the word out, being on fine programs like this. And people are warming up to it because they realize, because of the pandemic, this is probably the first time that they're having these end of life conversations and talking about, what's going to happen if something was to happen. And this is all due to the pandemic. And what happens is they might be having those conversations a lot, but they're not really doing anything about it. So hopefully the book is going to get people to either who have been deemed to be executors, because a lot of people have no idea what's involved, or someone who's planning their estate, make sure they're making the right steps to get everything organized so that they leave a legacy, not a legacy and a mess.
Well, definitely, I think everybody should read the book, Executor Help. There's some scary stories, and when I say scary, you will see what can go on in the state. And it's not just the very rich people. It could be your brother-in-law, your neighbor, etc. And you'll say, wait, I don't consider them to be people of wealth. They're just like me. They live next to me. They work next to me, etc. But once money comes into the picture, and even the people you don't consider wealthy may have some shares of stock, a retirement fund, a mutual fund, just a piece of real estate that today could be worth in the hundreds of thousands or millions, depending where it's located. So many really good points, and take notes as you're listening to what David has to say. Now, David, let's also remind people, because you bring it out in the book, aside from themselves and the assets, there's some other people involved called children, and they might be minor children to be taken care of, and or pets. And if it's a single person who has a dog or a cat or other type of pet, someone, I guess that's the executor, does have to jump in there and take care of that pet, because obviously the decedent loved them. They don't want them sitting in the house without food, water, proper care, etc.
Absolutely.
So can you mention that?
In the eyes of the law, you might, the pet might be a furry member of the family, but in the eyes of the law, they're seen as property. So if you haven't made allowance of what's going to happen to that pet, and you haven't told the executor what you want done with it, the executor has no idea. So 9 times out of 10, the executor will just take it to the shelter. So you want to make allowance within your will to say what you want done with your pet. Is there someone in the family you want to leave it to, and you want to make sure that they're going to be cared for. I talk about that in the book. What can happen if you make allowance for the pets, and what can happen if you don't make allowance for the pet. And again, having a pet is, for a lot of people, they mean more to some than some of the humans in their lives. And I think if you don't have an estate plan and make it organized, what you would want for your pet may not be what's going to happen to them. On the other hand, if you have children, especially if they're under the age of 18, if you don't have an estate plan or a will organized, you've just decided that the state is going to decide what's going to be the future of your family, of your children. And I don't think anybody wants for that to happen. So again, it's another reason to have an estate, have a will. But if you have children that are under the age of 18, then you also want to figure out who's going to be the guardian. What arrangements have you made financially so that your kids can prosper, hopefully into the future, through education or whatever, that you have dollars put aside for them, and you have the right guardian that you feel is going to make sure that the kids are going to flourish.
And David, you can tell me if this is good advice, but hearing this, and when I started reading your book, I said, oh my gosh, how would I even know this? It's like me being my own doctor. But luckily, we can go to someone called an estate attorney or an attorney who specializes in estates, wills, probate, etc. He or she will tell us many of these things to watch out for, especially like a doctor. Once they know our particular lifestyle, whether it's I'm a single person living alone, married with 3 ex-wives or 3 ex-husbands, things like this, 3, 5, or 7 children, maybe a child by each marriage, which I think all these are complicating factors that could make for more situations and more people coming in and less trust. Let's put it that way.
When you say the 3 ex-wives, that's what I call inside the book the triangle of conflict. As an executor,
you're so nice to say it that way.
Sorry?
The triangle of conflict. It sounds more like it's going to be on the murder channel.
Exactly. The triangle of conflict. If you're an executor or you have an estate there's no will, or there's second wives, or in your case, you're talking about 3 wives, or family members and siblings don't get along. If you've got even one of those issues in an estate and an executor has to deal with, the job just got a whole lot longer. And if you've got two issues, or if you hit the trifecta and have all 3 issues in the estate, the job has got. If you think that it's the worst job in the world, it became a worse job. If that's possible. The amount of aggravation and stress that you're going to have to go through is unbelievable. It's funny, the TV show that's popular now, Succession. If you look at what Succession's about, it's about an older gentleman. He's aging, he's dying, but he wants to leave his business, and he's got these messed up kids, and it's the same sort of thing. It's sort of a succession, a will, or an estate waiting to explode. Because if he was to pass away, and you see what a mess those kids are, then you end up with chaos and disorganization.
You're the second guest who actually mentioned that show on this radio show. So yeah. It's one that everybody should take a look at. I mean, it's pretty realistic, but and at least in that one, the older person has billions. Let's put it that way, I think. Exactly.
But you know what? You and I are of the same age, or in the same neighborhood of age. But we can also remember Dallas. Dallas is the exact same thing. You had the father, he was on in the beginning, but then he passes away. And then the will, to the mother, and then the mother passed away. And then you had JR and Bobby and the rest of the clan fighting over the estate.
After hearing all this, let me ask you, if someone names me as an executor, do I have the right to simply decline?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank God.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Make sure you renunciate. Make sure the lawyer knows that you are renunciating, and you're not going to be part of it. I talk about one of my friends in the book, and they said they didn't want to be part of a particular type of show. I'm not going to use the language, but they knew what the problem was going to be down the road, and they said, I don't want to be part of this show.
And how about on the other side of it, though? Let's just let people know, is the executor entitled to any compensation? Because you mentioned maybe 100 hours. And even if it's minimal, that is a lot of time. And in the open market, people would be entitled to be paid. Do they get anything for being executor?
Absolutely. Long as it's fair and reasonable, you can charge for your time to manage and administer the estate. But also understand that the IRS is going to see that as gross income. So it's not bonus money. You've got to report that income, but once you charge, you can charge for that time, as we're talking about. But if you're the executor and a beneficiary, a lot of times people waive their fee that they could charge because they're going to benefit from the executor. But then again, no estate is the same. Maybe you are going to charge because of the hassles and the aggravation and the complexity of settling the estate. It becomes a personal decision of what you want to do.
David,
it's not uncommon. It's not it's not unheard of.
David, once again, I want our audience to know, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is David Edey, E-D-E-Y. He's the author of the book, Executor Help, a short book, but very good, very pointed, and it will really wake you up to some problems that you can easily avoid if you follow his simple advice. David, can you tell us where we can get it and a website where we can learn more?
It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, online, or you can go to my website, davidedey.com, and you can purchase it there, or you can download checklists of what an executor needs. And also, I've got the 50 questions that everybody asks if they're becoming an executor. So you can also download that for free as well.
Really good information. And as I'm reading it, I'm saying, knowing something about handling estates, that all of this is going to save you money. It's not going to cost you more. Any of the advice you take from David, in the long run, it's going to save you a lot more money than, as David told you, 6 or 10 years in court, putting out money for lawyers, hardships in the family. The better you can set things up, the less room you have for problems, and if you have good professional advice. Now, you mentioned, David, something like 17 professionals might come into play. Can you give us some idea of who or the type of professionals you're talking about?
Well, you might need a real estate agent to, sell the home. You might need someone to come in to sell. You may have an estate sale. I talked about the accountant, the lawyer. You might need, depending on the size, maybe you need an auctioneer. I mean, as you go along, you might figure out, okay, I need another professional. Again, you want to cut down on the 18 to 24 months to get things done. If you have to get a professional to get things done, to move it along so that the assets are sold or they've got to be taken care of, because you're also working against the clock in terms of you've got beneficiaries who aren't afraid to pull the trigger and want to take you to court because you seem to be taking too long. And you've also got a time limit within the government as well, a reasonable time to settle the estate, because you've also got to settle up with the IRS to pay the taxes. So on average, I mean, you could go as high as 17 professionals, but just pick who you need. But the basis of starting is to have a good accountant, have a lawyer, financial advisor to help preserve the assets and until it's time to disperse.
You used a number 18 to 24 months. Is that an average time for an estate? Because I think most of us, especially since we grew up on the TV generation where everything is done within an hour,
right,
that the person dies and people sit around and I've never seen the reading of the will, and I remember a retired attorney, but people pass away and everything is done in that hour. And in the real world, I think getting it through the courts and getting approval and getting assets sold and marshaling the assets, getting releases from the tax authorities, having creditors happy, I think we're closer to the number you mentioned. What was it? 1.5 to 2 years?
18 to 24 months. But now we've got COVID, and a lot of times courts are shutting down, which everything gets backed up. So things aren't going to move along as quickly as on which would be a regular flow. That, with COVID now shutting down courts, it could even take longer. So it's and there's one point I should also mention. We talked about the will. We talked about, for children and pets. Another important thing that you also have to be concerned about are your digital assets. So it's anything you've ever bought online or have up in the cloud. So you need to make sure that your executor, and as executor also need to know where all logins and passwords are kept. So that means, for email, for social media, the banking online, anything that you got in the cloud, you need to make sure all of those passwords are somewhere along with the will, so the executor knows how to shut those things down. I had a friend talk about how a friend of his passed away 2 years ago, and the individual is still posting on his Facebook account. So you need to know how to shut down all of those social media accounts as well. So that's another part of, people don't think about it, but it's the digital assets along with your assets you can touch, the stock, your stocks, your mutual funds, things like that.
And I guess a lot of us today have recurring payments for subscriptions to magazines, for health clubs, and it's easy. We just say, yes, take it out, bill me every month. But once you pass away, you could be paying that for anywhere from a few months, and that's if you have a very alert executor and someone jumps on it, to a year and a half, or maybe longer if you don't know these things. In fact, I'd like your input on this. As going through your book, I just made a list of some things. The executor would have to know the person's assets, the bills, what they own, as you said, the code words for the computer, any work insurance or military benefits, also any open bills like cable TV that you'd be paying for every month at a pretty healthy fee. If that runs an extra year, that's literally taking money out of the executor's pocket and the beneficiaries. Is that correct?
Well, what's going to happen is once the bank knows that you're the executor, they know the person's dead, which means the account is frozen. So now you've got all of those bills bouncing. Now you're going to have creditors coming after because you haven't notified them that the individual has passed away. So that's just another job that you're going to have to take care of. You've got to alert all the creditors. So if you, besides the will, you need to, and I talk about in the book, you need to make sure that you have the will and also those logins and passwords, but put it in a place where your executor or your family members know where these important papers are kept. Because when there's trauma and there's grief, people can't find paperwork. So what I suggest is put it in a brightly colored envelope, a red or an orange, and you can tell them, you tell your executor or your family members, if something was to happen, go in the filing cabinet and you'll see a bright red envelope and everything should be in there. The will, your passwords, insurance policies, everything organized. Make it easy on your family, make it easier on your executor, so you don't leave them disorganized and in chaos.
And in the end, you obviously want your friends or your family, whoever you're leaving assets to get the most and the most out of them. So the less money they have to spend hiring someone to find assets, to pay off recurring bills, etc. It's just dissipating the estate, which the decedent certainly didn't want, and you as the beneficiary certainly don't want to happen. So, David, there's terrific tips in here. I can only emphasize to our audience, the book is called Executor Help. If you've never really thought of this, especially in this era of COVID where anything can happen, and we see that it's happening daily, and new news comes out. Unfortunately, it's usually a negative. And, of course, just the usual tragedies of life that come by, a car accident, an illness, cancer, etc. It's by our guest, David Edey. The book is Executor Help. And, David, once again, tell us where we can get the book and the website.
You can get it at Amazon or all great online retailers, or you can go to my website, davidedey.com. And there's some free resources that you can download. And
this book will definitely save you money in the long run. And I'm talking about hundreds, if not thousands, 10,000s, and maybe more than that. It's really good. It'll scare you a little bit, meaning tell you some of the problems that you might be facing, but it's also an alert that it's time to do something. And if your will isn't in place or hasn't been updated, maybe it's time to do that. David, thank you so much for being with us today.
Bill, thanks for having me here. It's been a real pleasure.
A lot of fun, and I've learned a lot. Thank you. I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.